Well met, everyone. I am Rich DeLitch, and today I am doing a review on Monsters of the Old World. This is a 81-page PDF that I downloaded this morning off of DM's Guild for $9.95. Let's run it through my review system of layout, design, and editing, art, and content, and at the end of it all, with my reviews, my thoughts, my comments, let's see if this is some content that might be a good fit for you and your gaming group. Let's jump into it. I am always a sucker for more monsters. I, of course, have the official 5th edition monster manual. I've got a Creature Codex on my shelf by Kobold Press, which is something like a 400-page new monster book. The reason why I'm really enamored and always intrigued by anyone's offerings on new monsters is I like to present something a little different, a little bit unexpected to my players, where, you know, in the monster manual, you have a beholder, and I'm not saying that the players are always going to metagame, but there's just a lot of information on the things we know. We expect most orcs are going to be at a certain challenge rating. We expect that their damage output is going to depend on how large the weapon is that they're using. We know that the beholder, there's always kind of that be careful of the disintegration thing, or, you know, the mind flayer. Oh my gosh, don't bunch up too close together, you know, because his psychic stun and so on and so forth. Is there any way we can get fire resist rings when we're going against the red dragons, or so on and so forth? So when you have something like this, where you're being offered and presented with entirely new things, it's a surprise both for the DM and for the players. So what we have here, as it says in the very bottom of the front cover, is we have a collection of creatures inspired by European folklore. So as I said, there are 81 pages in this PDF. Let's begin with layout, design, and editing. Front cover, very nice. Good title. I'm not going to talk about the artwork yet, but things are readable. I know exactly what book I have. I know that it was purchased through the DM's Guild. You've got the logo there, and at the bottom it has that white font with a stroke of black around it, so it's immediately readable and identifiable to let us know that we are looking at creatures usable in 5th edition, and they're inspired by European folklore. As we scroll through, this page is absolutely gorgeous, and it's the first time that we're informed as to the sort of aesthetic and the layout sense visually. So we've got this big credit section up top. You've got this divider, even though the credits itself is in that familiar maroon font, but it's big, bold letters. It's all capital, so on and so forth. And then you have that little identifier, or the line, I should say, which provides a little bit of a page break. These are things that I obsess about, but that's the reason for the layout, design, and editing category, is it's just being able to, with 81 pages, I want to be confident that I can navigate my eyes through a page and get the information I need conveyed sufficiently and adequately, but also just not create too much eye fatigue, you know, and have a good sense of breakup and use of bold font versus serif and sans serif and otherwise. So this is just very, very nicely done. I like kind of, you've got this, what is it, Celtic, I guess, symbol along the side, and just a cool touch with having that sort of torn out bit of break at the corner there where you have the page numbers. There's always that information at the bottom of letting us know exactly what we're looking at in Monsters of the Old World. As we scroll through, we've got table of contents, again, page breaks, good use of the dots and the lines that go across. Everything is justified and aligned properly. The monsters are laid in alphabetical order, or are laid out in alphabetical order, I should say. And then you've got those page numbers. Also, navigation-wise, if I was to look at the Pelflad, it says that the Pelflad is on page 55. So, using my PDF, if I hit page 55, hit enter, there he is. So really, really well done in ensuring that the page numbers and whether it's Adobe, Acrobat Reader, whatever you may use, is identifying what is considered the front cover and otherwise, because when you are looking at something that is number one paramount with layout, design, and editing, is the ability for the reader and your prospective audience to navigate through a document, especially when you have 81 pages. Yes, I can go through alphabetically. If I wanted to get into Sleipnir, I can just scroll through very quickly and know that as I start getting into these letters, I can kind of start to slow down when I start to get to S. There he is. It wasn't that difficult to find. But the beauty of using a PDF is when I can type in those page numbers and just jump where I need to jump. So very well laid out in that regard. Therefore, the table of contents is doing exactly what it should be doing, is helping us get through the page. Again, bold font. When it has a sort of a table heading or a subsection, everything is laid out in column format. As I mentioned, you've got that cool little design flourish around the outside. The colors are also very consistent. You have kind of these oranges and reds and maroons. The font is laid out on that parchment style. Everything laid out in its column format. The stat blocks are beautifully well done. They're familiar, of course. It's what you would see in the Monster Manual, almost, in exact detail with that little red, I call it the D&D swoosh, the Nike version of it. For layout, design, and editing, I have to give this 2 out of 2 possible points. Let's take a look at the art next. So, front cover is the first time that we see something, and it's beautiful. It's very well done. It's a beautiful, mysterious kind of... I'm not sure what I'm looking at. I think the monster might be this gigantic thing with its claw lifting up the blanket. It's interesting. It's not just an orc or something like this. It's intriguing. And when we talk about what this kind of content is about, it fits, because we're looking at something that could have been sort of the Baba Yaga, right? The Chupacabra. The various cultures and in real life of various peoples and their traditions and superstitions that have come about based on what sort of monsters are in their mythology and folklore and otherwise. So this image conveys that. Here is the best thing, and art can be summed up very, very quickly here with my review. There are 50 monsters, I believe. So that's what you're getting. Every single monster has a piece of artwork accompanying it. Every single one. So there's this guy, the Adar Lich Gwyn, the Afank, Amphizda, Baffordel, Belt. Look, I'll keep scrolling through. There's the buys. So here it's talking about the buys, and it gives you a long description and paragraph on it. And it's just talking about the layer because it's more powerful. And there's its own piece of artwork. But then on the next page where you have the stat block, I like that you have kind of that loosely drawn, sketched, element to it. So the art sometimes has multiple pieces for the same creature. But as I said, every single one is in the appropriate place. You get the picture. It fits, so I know exactly that monster belongs to this thing. There was an old monster manual. I don't remember what version it was. It was terribly laid out. There were pictures that were on another page, and the stat... Unless you knew the iconic creature of I know what an Umber Hulk looks like, you would look at a piece of artwork and say, that's a cool piece of art, but what the hell monster are they talking about? Here, you don't have such issues. Look at this thing. You're talking about a water horse. To see a monster book, picture's worth 1,000 words for monsters. I'm always reminded of how I would present a monster, and even my son looking through monster books, and that was the foundation for him drawing the cool and weird creatures he draws today, right? Of looking through that third 3.5 dragons in the Monster Manual, and that sparked his imagination. It's always just so cool to be like, hey guys, you see this, and just having artwork for every single piece, I have to give art a 3 out of possible 3 points. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of it, the meat and potatoes. Obviously, I'm not going to cover 81 pages. I'm just going to cover a few. Content-wise, what we are looking at, if I was to do a quick read through here. Did you study myths and legends in school? I'm reading right here. Did your parents tell you fairy tales? Have you ever heard a magical story from the man who lives at the end of the street? Each of us is immersed in a culture that deeply influences our own identity. The stories we heard in our childhood taught us how to behave, which morals we should pursue, the difference between right and wrong. Playing a role-playing game is nothing more than telling stories, and our decisions about who are the heroes and who are the villains are strongly connected to our beliefs. This book provides more than 50 creatures inspired by the folklore of several European countries. It is our attempt to bring the stories that have shaped our culture to the world's greatest role-playing game. It says more than 50 because if we look at the table of contents, as I went through every one of these, I counted 49, I think, but I only counted the Draugr, and then I counted the Einherjar. But within the book, why there's more than 50 is because there's a once-destroyed Draugr, there's a Draugr Channer, there's a Draugr Monstrosity. You see that in monster manuals a lot, right? Like 4 different versions of the Githyanki or something. So you're getting more than 50 here. The monsters are absolutely brilliant. One thing you can do when you're creating your own monsters is you can just think, this is a cool monster. Let's tack on all of the coolest, most ridiculous, awe-inspiring abilities. But once you wrangle it in and you bring that to the table, you're not confident that this thing has been play tested because the CR is skewed. You know, sure, I can make a cool effect of, say, this monster has Meteor Swarm, and I want to give him Beholder Stalker eyes, but I also want him to have the suck brain of a Mind Flayer, and so on and so forth. But then all of a sudden, if it's some fake creature that's a CR 1/4, there's a disconnect somewhere. So they're interesting, I think most importantly, because we're talking about things that, depending on where it comes from, you know, what part of culture and civilization and what group of people these ideas and these stories come from, and many of them, like the Norse ones, like Fenrir and, you know, the Valkyrie and stuff like that, they're from actual, you know, real world mythology stuff. There's a level of interest there because there's so much unknown. You know, there's so much intrigue and curiosity with that monster. So when you bring it to the table, it not only presents something cool and interesting because your players now need to come up with some options. When a group of PCs don't immediately know how to handle a certain conflict or an obstacle tactically, that can bring a lot of interest because you're no longer able to be as efficient as you want to be with your action economy because you're just not sure if you want to spend your reaction to use shield because you're not sure if the reaction might be usable, might be better used some way in another way. And the way that comes about is because you're just not sure what the hell the monster can do. And then from the Dungeon Master point of view, it's brilliant because I'm just excited and intrigued to learn more about the monster. And when you combine that with these paragraphs, so underneath this thing, which is this griffin-looking thing, like I said, the artwork is perfect and it's spot on, especially when you're dealing with things that you're not sure how to not only pronounce, you're also not sure how to wrangle in, like, what the hell is this thing? Are we talking about their version of a lich, or is it something entirely different? Is it some haunted, you know, boogeyman whatever it may be? The artwork is perfect. It gives you a paragraph, oftentimes, if not more, right? And sometimes the paragraph will take the form of kind of explaining in conversational format what its abilities are. And then, of course, you get the actual mechanical breakdown of what the ability, you know, within 60 feet it does this, make this saving throw, and so on. And it just does a great job. I love the little flourish of this, or the little addition of this italicized point where the Amphista has a twin head that is one at the tail's end as well, as though it were not enough for poison to be poured out of only one mouth. It oftentimes has a lot of like poetry within some of them, you know, like right here. Hear the lullaby it sings, while it binds you with its strings, ties the knot and tugs the rope. The air escapes, and so does hope. With tightened rope and evil will, the Borda sings, now watch it kill. And that's an old cautionary lullaby. Just within that, there's flavor, there's depth, there's detail, there's just some grit there. But then when you look at it, mechanically, it has a rope attack to succeed on a DC 15 strength saving throw or become grappled, so on and so forth. So it's just wonderful that every single monster has this entire bit, which is just story and cool bits and flavor. Volo's guy did a really good job of that. And so think of it from a WotC perspective. They took monsters in the monster book and they created an entirely different book that you would have to purchase, which is worthwhile, to sort of extrapolate and detail a little more on the story and the backstory. And because you're being presented with content here that's not intended, you know, where mythologically it wasn't made with the intention of how do we stat it out. It's just, this is what is told to children to scare them to going to bed, to make sure that you never wander too far from your home. It's just myths and stories and legends and folklore. So naturally, there's going to be a bunch of that information. But to have that plus an accompanying stat block that makes sense and meshes together, it's just really, really well done. There's so many good bits here. You know, you've got some, I mean, like I said before, this artwork is on a single page with just the little local proverb, and all of this before we even get into its own page on stat blocks. The monsters are really good. They're well laid out. Everything is very familiar. It looks like it is in the monster manual. There's a bunch of new, you've got one here, like this guy here, the Fosgrimmon, can breathe air and water and has advantage on attack rolls against any creature in water. Oftentimes you'll just see, what is it, amphibious trait, which he can breathe air and water. But okay, if you can kind of have your PCs fight him at the coastline and then they pull him out, it just informs us that he can fight both in both environments. But here, there's something with this tactically that if I can get the people to fight inside of water only, he's going to have advantage. So there's just little plays and twists on some existing traits, but they maybe add another layer, another depth, and another element there that, once again, becomes difficult for your PCs to kind of figure out exactly what can this thing do. And that provides, quite simply, just a more interesting encounter. So there's just so much here. There's little bits on talking about things, like as though it's just a conversational thing of, here's where this thing comes from, here's the history of it. I'm going to kind of talk to you about what I think this thing might be able to do. Then, of course, you've got the gameplay stat blocks. You've got these little red parts here in these boxes, which are immediately identifiable. Foskerman is willing to teach his arts, in some cases tune, or even give an instrument in exchange for a suitable payment that satisfies the following requirements. So there's just so many extra little bits besides it just saying, and it says it in the beginning, not everything here is just a horrible boogeyman of legendary death and evil. There's benevolent things here. There's more ways of interacting with the monsters in here than just roll initiative. And I like that it offers you all of that, because you're providing now a lot more range and options for use in content in your game. Every one of them is just outstandingly well done. Some things are very familiar, and they satisfy that bit where I was like, man, I remember reading about this in my mythology class. I had an actual mythology class in school, and it's always fascinating to just see how would they stat that thing. The greatest part is right here. Check this out. The back of the book. First, creatures are sorted by type, so you can easily identify if I want giants, or I only want dragons, or I only want elementals. Next table and block setting is creatures sorted by CR. So I know very quickly I want them to fight something CR 6 to 8. I know that I've got these things to look through. It now has them sorted by terrain. So these are from the coast. These are from the desert. These are things, if they're in the forest, here's all the different options of things I might be able to use. And then my favorite table in the back of the book is this one here, where it talks about the creature's origin. There is so much brilliance here. I oftentimes talk about, when you're talking about content, I not only want to see if you've provided me with something I can use now. Is it something that's going to help my rambling creative mind wrangle something in that I can get to 6 hours of gameplay? But beyond that, is there some content here that I can run with, some good bits that I'm inspired by that I might be able to take and use elsewhere to either create my own stuff or just extrapolate on and create an entire campaign and story arc? So are we talking about, are these monsters that are just a single roll initiative, you fought, you won, you lost? Or is there something I can take further into an entire Adventure Hook storyline campaign arc? And when you mention the creature's origin, not only do you answer the question that I'm having all the way through of, where is this thing from? Like, that sounds fascinating. Yes, there's a paragraph there, but I now can look about the Afank and the Adar Lich Gwyn and read about the mythology and the lore and the various superstitions and legends that came out of Wales and Greece and Poland. And then finally, because these things are so, especially when you're dealing with their translations through various languages, and I'm sure, and I apologize for those that speak that language, I've butchered a bunch of the names. I don't speak these languages, so I don't know how to say them. I do the best I can. I like that the next one, there is a pronunciation table, which is just, this stuff is gold, folks. I mean, it's offering us so much. It's giving us mystery and intrigue and excitement and something new that we can bring to the table again. There is a picture that accompanies every single one. The stat blocks are good. They run the gamut from 1/8 CR all the way up to a CR 30. There's some things here that are benevolent, so they might be helpful to the PCs, NPC interaction, so they don't necessarily have to be a combat. There's things that are just blatantly kill them. There's things that have enough flavor and story that you can run with as sort of a reoccurring, and it can be the villain for your entire campaign. There doesn't have to be a fight right away, but there's enough little bits that I can pull from in the lore and the intrigue of it, or the lore and the history of it, that I can kind of poke and prod and just present it to my players without blatantly putting a miniature on the table. Let me get over here to the credits. There's a lot of writers involved here, and it's obvious that you're taking the versions from people that have sort of lived it and breathed it, so to speak. You know, they've been among that culture and that history where they grew up being told about these things. And the accuracy there and the respect to just sort of, in real life, I always like to equate it as the world is a very big and vast place, and there's a lot of interesting things out there that when we sit at home in our little space, you know, in my office, I can often overlook and not realize and appreciate where so many of these things came from, especially when you're dealing with monsters, right? That's a huge thing in every society and culture. Is none of this stuff is in a vacuum. You can look up on almost any monster in any official D&D book from the beginning till now. Everything has come from somewhere or been inspired by something from some other culture, history, or country. And they've done that here, and they paid respects to it, and they've done it very, very well. So in that regard, I have to give this a perfect 5 out of 5 for content. This, folks, is my final score, and hopefully, with that score, and all of my ramblings throughout this review, I hope you're a bit better informed as to whether or not this might be something. You know what? Go out there and get it. I'm going to put a link in the description of where you can download this off of DM's Guild if you are looking for more monsters, and especially if you're like me and you want some stuff that's new with some new flavor, both statistically and gameplay wise, but also just new flavor and new inspiration for your mind. The Monsters of the Old World is well worth your $9.95. That's all I have for you folks. Thanks everyone for watching, and take care.